From the very first moment he stepped into the room, Isabella felt something inside her collapse. It was as if her old life had ended the instant his shadow crossed the floor. She didn't need anyone to explain what was happening. Her heart already knew. Before that day, her world had been simple. She lived in a small village where the houses stood close together, almost leaning on each other like family. Everyone knew her by name, and she knew every neighbor in return. Her father spent his days working in the fields, while her mother cared for their little home. The house itself was small and plain, but it was full of warmth. Inside, Isabella grew up with two younger brothers whose noise filled the air, yet their laughter was the kind she cherished most. Despite the modest life, her heart carried a dream, one that seemed ordinary but was everything to her. She wanted to become a teacher. Books were her constant companions, pages opening doors to worlds she could only imagine. She longed to give other children the same gift, to show them that stories could carry them beyond the fields and narrow streets of their village. Her parents knew her dream well. They often told her, "Isabella, you are clever. You can do anything." They worked tirelessly so she could attend the village school, and she treasured every lesson she learned there. But one evening, her parents called her into the room with faces more serious than she had ever seen. Fear tightened in her chest before they even spoke. Something was wrong. Her father avoided her eyes, and her mother's hand felt cold as it closed around hers. Then came the words that silenced her world. A man had asked to marry her. She was only 18, full of hopes for study and teaching, and marriage was the last thing on her mind. She protested, whispering that she didn't want it. At last, her father met her eyes. His gaze was heavy with sorrow as he explained that the harvest had failed and the family had no money. The man who wanted her hand was wealthy, from a respected family, and he could provide for her brother's future. Tears slipped down Isabella's face as she whispered that she didn't even know him. Her mother repeated softly, "He is a good man." They said his name was Daniel, a businessman from the city. He was 30 years old and had distant family ties with Isabella's grandparents. That was all she knew about him. To Isabella, the name felt heavy on her tongue, like a stranger she was forced to carry. The wedding approached with frightening speed. Her mother sewed a white dress, delicate and beautiful, but Isabella felt no beauty wearing it. She felt like a doll, dressed up and placed on display without a choice of her own. Friends from the village gathered, smiling for her, unaware of the emptiness hidden behind her practiced smile. In the small church, whispers filled the air as everyone turned toward the door. Then he appeared, Daniel, tall, in a dark suit, with stern eyes that showed no warmth. He walked with steady steps, but he never looked at her. Isabella's heart pounded like a sad drum in her chest as she realized this man was her husband. The ceremony was brief. Her voice trembled as she said, "I do," a sound she barely recognized as her own. Daniel's voice, deep and firm, answered without hesitation. The cold touch of a ring slid onto her finger, sealing a future she hadn't chosen. Just like that, Isabella ceased to be herself. She became Mrs. Daniel. Afterward, the celebration began, though for Isabella it felt more like a blur. She sat beside Daniel at a long table, the two of them silent. He ate slowly, speaking little, his gaze drifting to others, but never once to her. She felt like a ghost at her own wedding. When it came time to leave, the pain of goodbye nearly tore her apart. She hugged her mother, who whispered through tears, "Be happy, my child." Her father held her tightly, murmuring that Daniel would take care of her. Her little brothers clung to her, too young to understand why their sister had to go. A black car waited, larger and darker than anything Isabella had ever seen. She stepped inside, her heart breaking as she watched her family and village disappear through the window, shrinking smaller and smaller until they were gone. The road stretched long, and silence filled the car like a heavy fog. Isabella wanted to ask where they were going, but fear held her tongue. Daniel's face was stone, unreadable, as the night deepened outside. Hours passed before the car finally rolled into the city, where towering buildings and endless lights made the village feel like a memory from another lifetime. The vehicle stopped before an enormous house, more a mansion than a home. A gate opened slowly, and they drove inside. The doors were tall and dark, and when they opened, an older woman dressed in black greeted them. Her words were flat, almost mechanical. "Welcome, Mr. Daniel. Welcome, Mrs. Daniel." Without a word, Daniel stepped out and walked into the house. Isabella followed, her heart heavy, stepping into a life that no longer felt like her own. Daniel didn't wait for her as he stepped inside. Isabella trailed behind, her small figure seeming to shrink even more against the towering doors of the mansion. Each step she took reminded her that she no longer belonged to herself. The house swallowed her whole the moment she crossed the threshold. Marble floors gleamed under the dim lights, reflecting her pale face back at her like a stranger. A staircase curved upward, elegant yet cold, as though it had never carried warmth in its steps. The walls echoed with silence, and the grand rooms felt more like hollow halls of a museum than the heart of a home. The older woman, dressed in black, led Isabella down a long corridor. Her voice was flat when she spoke. "This will be your room, madam." Those words struck Isabella sharply. Your room. Not our room. Only hers. The chamber was larger than the house she had grown up in. A bed with endless white sheets stretched before her, its size almost mocking the narrow cot she once called her own. Curtains draped over a wide window, and when she pulled them back, the view revealed nothing but dark, crowded buildings stacked against one another. The woman left without another word, and the silence fell heavy again. Sitting at the edge of the soft mattress, Isabella felt no comfort. The bed swallowed her, but she longed for the rough, familiar blankets of her home. Everything in this place was strange. The walls, the air, the man she now had to call her husband. The thought broke her, and tears spilled until her pillow grew damp with sorrow. Time blurred until the sound of a knock startled her. The door creaked open slowly, and there he was, Daniel. He entered quietly, his tall frame filling the doorway. For a long moment, he simply stood there, watching her with unreadable eyes. Isabella froze. Fear pressed against her chest, each heartbeat heavy and frantic. She thought he might be angry at her tears, perhaps even cruel. But no words of anger came. The silence stretched between them until finally he spoke. "You are tired." His voice came low and steady. "You should rest." That was all. No comfort, no touch. Just a simple command. He held her gaze for one last second, then turned away, closing the door gently behind him. She sat on the bed in confusion. She had expected anger, maybe even harshness. But instead there was only distance, quiet, cold, suffocating distance. Left alone once more, Isabella wondered where he had gone, where he would sleep, and whether this was what her life would always feel like. The night carried her into restless dreams, tears marking her first sleep as a wife. When morning came, sunlight filtered through the tall window, brushing the white sheets with gold. For one sweet instant, Isabella forgot. She thought she was back in her small village room, with the sounds of roosters outside. But memory returned quickly, pressing down on her chest like a weight. She dressed in the simple clothes she had packed and descended the stairs. The mansion felt deserted, its stillness heavier than the silence of a grave. In the kitchen, she found the same woman from the night before. Her name, she learned, was Martha, the housekeeper. "Good morning, madam," Martha said without expression. Isabella whispered a return greeting. Martha explained that Daniel had already left for work. He always departed before sunrise and returned late into the night. She promised to prepare breakfast, then fell quiet. The knowledge that he was gone brought Isabella a small measure of relief, yet it also deepened her loneliness. She ate her meal at a dining table so long that it seemed built for kings, her single presence lost among the empty chairs. Though the food was rich, she tasted nothing but longing for her mother's cooking and the laughter of family gathered around a modest table. The days began to melt into one another. Each morning, Isabella woke alone. Each evening, she sat in silence. The hours stretched endlessly as she walked through the echoing halls, her footsteps the only sound against the marble. Daniel left before she ever stirred from bed and returned only when her door was already closed. Sometimes she heard his steps across the floors, but she never saw his face. They lived in the same house, yet it felt as though they occupied two different worlds. Isabella had fine dresses now, expensive meals, and a grand chamber. But her heart remained empty. The mansion was nothing more than a golden cage. She was trapped inside beauty, aching for the life she had lost. A week slipped by, then another. Still, Daniel remained distant. The few reminders of his presence were faint, the faint sound of a door closing, the hush of footsteps at night. Isabella began to wonder if he regretted everything. Perhaps he was ashamed of her, a simple village girl who could never match the elegance of city women. Maybe he had taken her out of duty, not desire. One evening, the silence shifted. Isabella wandered into the library, the only place in the house that gave her comfort. Books lined the shelves from floor to ceiling, their spines like old friends waiting to be touched. She ran her fingers across them, grateful for their company. The door creaked open. She turned, and her heart jolted. Daniel stood there. He had come home early. The surprise made her pulse race as he loosened his tie, looking weary. His eyes found her, and for once, he stopped. "Hello," he said quietly. "Hello," she answered, just as softly. The air between them was thick with awkwardness. Neither knew what to say. Then his eyes drifted to the book in her hand. "Do you like reading?" he asked. She nodded quickly. "Yes, very much." Daniel walked toward a shelf and pulled out a volume. "This one is good," he said simply, handing it to her. On the cover were poems, words that spoke directly to the heart. Isabella's fingers trembled as she accepted the gift. "Thank you," she whispered. He gave a small nod, then turned and left the room, leaving her standing with the book clutched to her chest. It was only a short exchange, a handful of words. But to Isabella, it was everything. For the first time since her wedding, Daniel had seen her, not as a burden, not as a stranger, but as a person. The book of poems became more than pages bound together. It was a sign that perhaps, beneath his silence, he had noticed her existence. From that moment, something fragile began to change. Small gestures broke the endless silence. Isabella began leaving a light on in the hallway, so he would never return to a home swallowed by darkness. It was a small flame, but for her, it was hope. The days inside the mansion began to shift in small but meaningful ways. Isabella, once lost in silence, started taking steps to bridge the distance between herself and Daniel. She asked the housekeeper, Martha, about his favorite foods, determined to show him care in the only way she knew how, through cooking. She would prepare simple dinners, carefully arranging each plate and leaving them on the dining table before retreating to her room. By morning, the dishes were always empty, carried away without a word. He never mentioned it, but the empty plates told her enough. He was eating the meals she made, and that quiet acknowledgement filled her with a quiet sense of connection. One afternoon, Isabella wandered into the garden behind the house. The garden was large and once beautiful, but now it had been neglected. Roses drooped sadly, and weeds covered the flower beds. The place carried the echoes of something that had been loved long ago, but it now stood in disrepair. Isabella had always loved flowers. Back in her village, she had tended a small garden of her own, where colors bloomed under her care. That memory stirred something inside her, and she decided to bring this forgotten garden back to life. Each day she worked in the soil, pulling weeds, watering roots, and coaxing fragile plants back to strength. Her hands grew rough and dirty, but with each touch of the earth, she felt alive again. There was joy in that labor. For the first time in weeks, she felt useful, as if she was creating something that mattered. One evening, as the sun painted the sky with gold and crimson, Daniel arrived home to find her still in the garden. She hadn't heard him approach, so when his voice broke the quiet, she jumped. "The garden looks nice," he said softly. She spun around and saw him standing just a few steps away, watching her carefully. Embarrassed, she thanked him, her cheeks warming with a shy blush. She admitted she enjoyed gardening, and for a moment his expression softened. His eyes moved to the roses, and his voice grew tender. "My mother loved this garden," he murmured. "She passed away a few years ago, and since then, no one took care of it." For the first time, Daniel shared something personal, something fragile about his past. Isabella caught a glimmer of sorrow in his eyes. In that instant, he stopped being just the serious, distant stranger she had married. He became a man with a history, a man who had known loss. She whispered that she was sorry, but he only shook his head. "Don't be. You're bringing it back to life," he replied. They stood together, saying nothing more, as the sun slipped beneath the horizon. But the silence between them no longer felt heavy. It was peaceful, gentle, almost comforting. For Isabella, the house felt a little less lonely after that evening. In the days that followed, Daniel began coming home earlier than before. Slowly, they started sharing dinners together. At first, the meals were awkward, filled with quiet glances and little conversation. She was shy, and he was reserved. But gradually, words began to flow. Isabella told him about her village, her parents, and her dream of becoming a teacher. To her surprise, Daniel listened with genuine interest. He asked questions, eager to know more about her life. Then, little by little, he began opening up too. He told her about the company he now managed, a business his father had built from nothing. Carrying the weight of his father's legacy was not easy. He confessed that the responsibility consumed him, leaving little space for friends or joy. Isabella realized that behind his stern exterior, he too was lonely. Two people, strangers under the same roof, had begun to find each other in that loneliness. One night, a storm rolled over the city. The wind howled against the windows, and rain lashed the glass in furious waves. Thunder roared, shaking the house with every strike. Isabella had always feared storms. Back in her childhood, she would hide in her mother's arms until the skies calmed. But now, alone in the vast bedroom, she trembled beneath her blankets. When lightning split the night sky, she buried her head under her pillows, her body shaking like a frightened child. A soft knock came at her door. It creaked open, and Daniel appeared, holding a candle. The power had gone out. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. His eyes studied her trembling form. She could only nod, unable to form words. He crossed the room and sat at the edge of her bed. He didn't touch her, didn't invade her space. He simply stayed near, his presence steady and calming. "It's just a storm," he assured her in a quiet voice. "It will pass." As the thunder rolled outside, he began sharing a story from his childhood, how he too had been afraid of storms when he was a boy. His words softened the fear in the room, and slowly, Isabella's breathing eased. He stayed with her until the storm moved on. When she finally drifted into sleep, he was still there. By morning, he was gone, but something inside her had shifted. From then on, Daniel was no longer just her husband. He was her protector, her companion. A bond had begun to grow. Day by day, they laughed more often. His laughter surprised her. It was warm and made his usually serious face light up in a way that made him look almost like a different man. Isabella began to look forward to their evenings together, waiting eagerly for the sound of his footsteps when he returned home. One evening, Daniel brought home a large box. "This is for you," he said. Isabella lifted the lid to find it full of books. Books about teaching, books for children, books to help her learn and grow. She looked at him, stunned, as he reminded her of the dream she had once shared with him. "You can study here," he said. "You're smart. You can do anything." Her eyes filled with tears, happy tears this time. She had thought that dream was gone forever, but now, here it was, alive again in his hands. She whispered her thanks, her voice trembling with emotion. For the first time, she saw kindness shining openly in his eyes. From that day on, Isabella studied every morning and every night. Daniel encouraged her, asking questions about what she learned, praising her progress. The mansion, once a cold and empty place, began to change. Flowers filled the garden, the air smelled of her cooking, and soft music drifted through the rooms. Slowly, the house became a home. One evening, they sat together in the living room with a fire glowing in the fireplace. The warmth filled the room as they read side by side in silence. It was a peaceful quiet, one that felt safe. As Isabella watched Daniel in the firelight, her heart swelled with a feeling she had never known before. It was love. She put her book down and moved closer, resting her head on his shoulder. At first, he seemed surprised, but when she smiled at him, his expression softened. He slipped his arm around her, holding her close. It felt right, as if she had finally found where she belonged. He whispered her name, and the way he spoke it made it sound like the most beautiful words she had ever heard. She whispered his name back, her voice full of quiet joy. He leaned in and kissed her gently. It was not the kiss of a stranger. It was the kiss of her husband, her friend, the man she loved. In that moment, Isabella realized something important. Her life had not ended on her wedding day. It had only begun. Though the path had been painful, full of fear and uncertainty, it had led her to something she never expected: love. Life, she thought, had a strange way of surprising people. Dreams once thought lost could bloom again in unexpected soil. She remembered her parents saying Daniel was a good man. Now, she knew they had been right. He was more than good. He was her good man. Her story was not one of endings, but of new beginnings. It was proof that even in the darkest moments, hope could return. Love could grow where no one believed it possible. And as she looked at Daniel, Isabella believed with all her heart that her story was not only a happy one. It was just the beginning of something even greater. Life in the mansion had changed so much that Isabella sometimes wondered if she was living in the same place at all. Where there had once been only silence, now there was laughter. Where there had been cold walls, now there was warmth. Yet, even as love grew between Isabella and Daniel, life beyond the gates of the grand estate began to stir with new challenges. Daniel's company demanded more of him each day. As his responsibilities grew heavier, his hours at the office lengthened again. Isabella tried to be patient, reminding herself of the effort he had made to open his heart to her. Still, the long evenings without him brought back an ache of loneliness she thought she had left behind. She filled the time with books, with tending the garden, and with dreams of her future as a teacher. But deep down, She feared that the walls which had once separated them might rise again. One evening, Daniel returned later than usual. His face was tense, and his steps were heavy. Isabella met him in the hall, concern in her eyes. He tried to smile, but it was faint and tired. Over dinner, he revealed the truth. His company was facing serious problems. A competitor had grown stronger, threatening everything his father had built. Isabella listened quietly as he spoke. It was rare for Daniel to admit his fears, and the weight of his words pressed on her heart. He was a man used to carrying burdens alone, yet here he was, sharing them with her. She reached across the table, placing her hand gently over his. "You don't have to face this alone," she whispered. Her words surprised him. For years, he had believed that showing weakness was dangerous. But now, with Isabella, he allowed himself to breathe. That night, for the first time, he confessed how heavy the crown of leadership felt. He admitted that sometimes he wished he could escape the endless demands of the business and live a simpler life. In those confessions, Isabella saw the man behind the suit, the man who had once been a boy afraid of storms. She reminded him that strength was not about carrying every burden in silence. It was about having someone to share them with. The following days tested their bond further. Rumors spread about the company, and Daniel worked long hours trying to secure contracts and protect jobs. Isabella supported him in quiet but powerful ways. She prepared meals that would be waiting when he came home exhausted. She filled the house with light and warmth, making it a refuge from the storm outside. And every evening, no matter how late, she waited for him by the fire with a book in her hands. But their challenges did not stop at the company's struggles. The outside world had begun to notice Daniel's young wife. Whispers reached Isabella about people questioning her place in his life. Some said she was too young, too inexperienced, that she was only there for his wealth. Others pitied her, imagining her trapped in a loveless marriage. At first, Isabella tried to ignore the gossip. Yet one afternoon, as she walked through town to buy flowers for the garden, she overheard two women speaking in hushed voices. "She's just a village girl," one of them said with a sharp laugh. "What does she know about being the wife of a man like Daniel Walker?" The words pierced Isabella like thorns. She carried her basket of flowers home, her heart heavy. For hours, she sat in the garden, staring at the roses she had nurtured back to life. She knew she loved Daniel, and she believed he loved her. But was it enough to silence the doubts of the world outside their gates? That evening, Daniel found her still sitting among the flowers, her eyes clouded with sadness. He asked what was wrong, and she hesitated. But when she finally told him what she had heard, his expression hardened, not with anger at her, but at the cruel voices that sought to wound her. "Isabella," he said firmly, kneeling beside her, "you are the best thing that has ever happened to me. Let them talk. They don't know us. They don't know what we've been through." His words were steady, but she could see the fire in his eyes. For the first time, she realized how fiercely he wanted to protect her, not just from storms of nature, but from storms of people's judgment. Their bond deepened further after that night. Daniel made more effort to show the world that Isabella was not just his wife, but his partner. He invited her to accompany him to company events, something he had never done before. At first, Isabella was nervous, stepping into a world of polished faces and sharp words. To everyone's surprise, Isabella carried herself with quiet grace. She did not try to impress with grand speeches. Instead, she listened, she asked kind questions, and she spoke gently about her dream of teaching. People who had dismissed her began to look at her differently. They saw not just a young wife, but a woman with strength and dignity. Still, not everyone was kind. At one dinner, a wealthy man made a cruel remark about her humble background. Isabella's cheeks burned, But before she could respond, Daniel spoke up. His voice was calm, but firm as steel. "Her past makes her who she is," he said. "And it is her heart, not her background, that matters to me. If anyone here cannot respect my wife, then they do not respect me either." The room fell silent. Isabella's eyes filled with tears, not from shame, but from pride. She realized then that Daniel was not just defending her. He was choosing her, openly and without hesitation. As the weeks went on, the storms around them, both in business and in society, continued to rage. But instead of breaking apart, Daniel and Isabella grew stronger. They faced the world not as strangers bound by a contract, but as two souls who had found each other in the most unlikely way. And yet, in the quiet of the nights, Isabella sometimes felt a shadow in her heart. She knew their story was far from over. There were still battles ahead, some that neither of them could yet see. The mansion that had once been cold was now a home full of warmth, but outside its walls, challenges loomed larger than ever. For Isabella, one truth became clear. Love was not just about soft moments by the fire or laughter over dinner. Love was about standing together when the world tried to pull you apart. And as she looked at Daniel, she knew that whatever came next, they would face it side by side. But fate, as it often does, had more surprises in store. Months passed, and the rhythm of Isabella and Daniel's life settled into something both ordinary and extraordinary. The mansion no longer felt like a cage, but a place alive with warmth, laughter, and quiet companionship. The garden bloomed with colors brighter than ever, and Isabella filled the halls with music, light, and the smell of fresh bread. To anyone looking in, it seemed as though the story had reached its happy ending. But life, as it often does, held one more secret waiting to be revealed. One crisp autumn evening, Daniel received a letter. The envelope bore a seal he hadn't seen in years, the kind that made his expression change the moment he touched it. Isabella noticed the shadow that passed across his face as he opened it, but he said nothing. Later that night, while he thought she was asleep, she saw him sitting by the fire, the letter trembling in his hands. The next morning, she asked him gently what was wrong. At first, Daniel hesitated, but then he gave her the truth. The letter was from a lawyer representing someone from his father's past. A woman had come forward, claiming that her son, now a young man, was Daniel's half-brother, a child his father had kept hidden. The letter demanded recognition, inheritance, and a share of the company. For Daniel, the revelation shook everything he believed about his family. His father, the man he had admired and tried to honor, had kept a secret that now threatened to unravel not only the company, but his very sense of identity. Isabella listened quietly, her heart aching for him. She knew how much Daniel's family legacy meant to him, how much pressure he had carried to protect it. Now, with this secret exposed, everything seemed uncertain. But instead of pulling away, Isabella did what she had learned to do best. She stood beside him. The following weeks were filled with tension. Rumors spread through the business world like wildfire. Shareholders whispered about betrayal and scandal. The supposed half-brother, a man named Adrian, made bold appearances in the press, demanding his place. Isabella watched as Daniel fought to keep control of the company while also struggling with the truth about his father. But amid the storm, something unexpected happened. One evening, Isabella asked Daniel to meet Adrian, not as a businessman, but as a brother. Daniel resisted at first, but her words planted a seed. When they finally met, the air was heavy with anger and distrust. Adrian carried the weight of years spent in the shadows, while Daniel bore the burden of protecting a family name built on secrets. Yet, as they spoke, Isabella noticed something striking. Adrian wasn't a villain. He was simply a man who had been denied a family and wanted acknowledgement. The conversation was long, painful, and full of sharp words. But by the end, Daniel's hard edges softened. He realized that his father's mistakes did not have to define the future. With Isabella's encouragement, he offered Adrian a role in the company, not as an enemy to be silenced, but as a partner to be respected. It was a choice that stunned everyone. Shareholders doubted it. The press mocked it. But Isabella saw what it truly was, an act of courage. By embracing the truth instead of hiding from it, Daniel freed himself from the chains of his father's shadow. The weeks that followed were not easy, but slowly, a fragile trust grew between the brothers. Adrian proved himself capable, and though tensions remained, Daniel began to see him not as a rival, but as family. For Isabella, it was proof that love could heal even the deepest fractures. Yet the greatest twist of all was still to come. One winter morning, Isabella felt faint while tending to the roses in the garden. Martha rushed to her side, alarmed. A doctor was called, and after a quiet examination, he delivered the news. Isabella was expecting a child. When Daniel heard, his usually calm demeanor broke. His eyes filled with tears as he embraced her, his voice shaking with disbelief and joy. For a man who had once been alone in a cold mansion, who had believed that family was only a duty, the thought of holding his own child was overwhelming. The months of her pregnancy brought new challenges, but also new hope. Daniel became more protective than ever, often leaving work earlier just to sit with Isabella and feel the baby's gentle movements. Adrian, too, softened, showing a surprising tenderness toward his soon-to-be nephew or niece. On a snowy evening, under the soft glow of the fireplace, Isabella gave birth to a daughter. They named her Clara, a name that meant light, for she was the light that had entered their lives after so much darkness. Holding Clara in his arms, Daniel whispered words Isabella had never thought she'd hear from him. Now I finally understand what it means to live, not just survive. The mansion that had once felt like a tomb now echoed with a baby's laughter. The garden bloomed year-round. The company found new strength under the unlikely partnership of two brothers, and Isabella discovered her dream of teaching again by starting a small school for children in the village nearby. Her life had begun as a story of fear, loneliness, and loss. She had once believed her world had ended on her wedding day, but now, with Daniel by her side and Clara in her arms, she saw that life had only been waiting to surprise her with something greater. And in that quiet moment, as the snow fell gently outside and the fire crackled warmly inside, Isabella realized the truth that would stay with her forever. Sometimes the most unexpected endings are not endings at all. They are beginnings, new chapters that remind us that love, forgiveness, and hope can grow in the unlikeliest of places. Her story was proof of it. And though the road had been hard, her heart whispered with certainty, "This is my happy ending, and it is only the beginning."